I know I need a change, but what am I supposed to type into LinkedIn? How do I find a pivot when I don't know the job title? That is what we're talking about today. I found the job that moved me from government into tech and paid me more than $20,000 more, even though I barely understood the title when I applied. It was called Partnerships Executive. Executive sounds very senior. However, it was a British startup and they use executive rather loosely. Okay. But I found the job because I had realized something. There were more careers available to me than I knew how to name. So if you know you need a change, but every LinkedIn search keeps showing you slightly different versions of the job you already have, this video is for you. By the end, I'll give you the three-part test I now use to identify career rooms that are valuable, funded, and less crowded. I was the youngest person on a government team. And I was looking around me. And then if I just kept looking up, I was like, I don't necessarily see myself doing any of this stuff in a year or 2 years, right? So I understood that working in government was stable and deeply connected. So if I had stayed, things would have changed incrementally in terms of the work and my salary, and I would have been quote unquote safe. But I really wanted an environment where I can learn faster and be more innovative in my learning, especially since I was so early in my career. And by doing that job, because I worked in workplace placement and future of work, I knew that more jobs existed than what I had originally thought when I started in the workforce. I knew that there were other titles, there were other salary bands that I could do, and I had to go out and explore it. So I couldn't name them and I wanted to. So what I ended up doing was exploring LinkedIn. Let me just explore what they do and then I'll just read the job description and see if I can do those things. And I think that was like my biggest learning because when you look at a title and you're fixated on the title, then you end up limiting what you can actually do because companies, like I said, they were calling me executive. If I just looked at that title, I would have been like, I'm nobody's executive. But like when I read the job description, I was like, oh, I can do the things that they're asking me to do. And that's part of the reason why I got the job because I read the job description rather than the title. And then as I read the job descriptions, whether something caught my eye or not, if the company at large was interesting to me, I would then go look at their people. And then if anyone in their people had anything I can connect with, then I would reach out. So my connectors back then is my undergrad is in education, my master's is in social work, but also the college I went to. I think those are my main things that I would look for. If you had any of those and you worked in any of these places, I would reach out with something to the extent of I'm looking for a new role. I see that you have a similar background as me. Do you want to chat? So, through conducting informational interviews, I did get a few interviews, but one interview is what helped me go from working in government to working in tech. And in that interview, that company was an apprenticeship company, meaning that they were supporting people who did not have 4-year degrees, who worked like frontline jobs, get into more career sustaining jobs. The openings that they had available, one of them was for a partnerships executive. And this person was the person who would reach out and find these types of candidates. So I was already in the network of people who this new company wanted to recruit to get into these types of jobs. So I messaged the COO because she was honestly the only person I could find. So I messaged her and I said, hey, I see what you're doing. This is what I do. I think there's a great match here. I already know the people that you need. I already work with a ton of nonprofits and community colleges, which I think would be great for this. So we had one call, which was supposed to be the informational interview. But after the informational interview, she said, I think you'd be a great fit. And then she sent me to HR and said, hey, move her along to the next interview. And I think 3 weeks later, I had a new job and I had officially pivoted from government to tech. Right. And I think what's really important here is that my search bar could only return careers I already knew how to name. But the conversations expanded my vocabulary and also gave me a better way to position myself. Back to this job. So, why did they hire me? Why did they need me? Why was I able to make this transition? Ultimately, they needed me or they hired me because the sales team, they could secure the large employer contracts. So they could go out, and one of the people we worked with was like Delta Airlines or Google or McKinsey. They could go out to those people and say, hey, we noticed that you have a ton of entry level jobs that you have not filled. We can help you fill them, right? But once those companies say yes, they need people to fill them quickly. And that's where I came in. So I was there to not only find candidates, but make sure they were ready for interviews so we could actually fill these contracts that we were getting. I already understood nonprofits and workforce programs. I understood employers and government systems. So that was like an easy win. In that sense, my new employer didn't have to train me in that. I already knew that, right? So they didn't simply need someone who loved education. They needed someone who could turn an employer contract into an actual pipeline of candidates. I can make the money because I could bring in candidates. I could save them time because I already knew the networks to reach out to. And they already knew me too, right? So I remember receiving my offer letter at my friend's standing desk. I lived with two other roommates, and they were doing all sorts of activities during the work hours. And I just needed to know that I would have a PG-13 sound when I was doing my interviews. Getting that offer letter increased my salary by 20,000. Now, the thing with this was when I told some of my coworkers, they were just kind of like, what? Why would you switch? In government, you have to take a civil service exam, and pretty much if you pass it, then you get put on these lists, and then you're pretty much on track to be a forever employee, right? You're kind of tenured into the system. And for me to be so young in the system, people are like, why would you leave? And so many coworkers questioned this, but I was like, I gotta go. I gotta go. And then in leaving, I was nervous because government, I just told you about all the stability. And then now I was going to tech, especially a startup. I was a third hire. So they really could have just been like, adios, like 2 months later, for all I knew. But I took the leap anyway. And when I took the leap, that brought like new challenges because once I was there, a lot of the nonprofits that I was like, oh, they will definitely support me. They were actually skeptical because they were like, well, why do you want our students? Why do you want our candidates? What is the catch? Why do you want folks who do not have a 4-year degree who are working these minimum wage jobs? Why do you want them now working at these corporations?
The nonprofit was right to ask what the catch was. Apprentices started at about 80% of the standard salary while completing weekly training. The program created access to roles that normally required a 4-year degree. And after the first year, if they were retained, they were promoted out of the apprenticeship and became regular schmegler employees and moved to the full minimum salary for the role. That was the trade off, and I had to explain it plainly.
Ultimately, I didn't just understand candidate recruitment, I also understood that every referral came with borrowed trust, and I had to show up with facts and honesty. Traditional partners couldn't always move immediately. So a lot of these programs are on cycles. Think about a regular school cycle. You graduate in June or December. They were pretty much doing the same thing. So we couldn't have the students or the candidates until they graduated. And what that meant was that I was sitting there like, okay, well, I need them today to fill this. So I actually ended up going on TikTok. And I chose TikTok because back then we only supported people who were between 18 to 26. And I was panicking. I was like, I just got this job. I need to get results. Where can I find 18 to 26-year-olds who want jobs? I made a TikTok. I said something to the extent of like, if you do not have a 4-year degree and you're looking for a job that would pay you 80,000 or more, check this out. And I did that on a Friday. On a Monday, I logged into work and our like candidate funnel person was like, did you sign any new partnerships? Because you broke our website. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, we've had over 4,000 registrations in the past few days. Sometimes the talent shortage is really a distribution problem because the opportunity existed, the people existed. They simply hadn't found each other yet. And that's what I did through my work. So, if you are looking to pivot into something new and you're wondering, how do I evaluate an unfamiliar career room? I think you can ask the question of, is the problem expensive? Unfilled apprenticeship seats threatened delivery, which meant that we could lose money. Number two, is there a buyer with a budget? Employers were already paying for the program. So the sales team had done their job, but we needed to fill in that gap, and that's where I came in. So is the problem expensive? Is there a buyer with a budget? And lastly, is my skill combination scarce in that room? So for me, I was combining education, workforce development, government access, employer knowledge, and social work trust. So years later, I was laid off from this job, which was one of the fears leaving government. But I found my next path pretty much the same way. I audited the work I had actually enjoyed while I was at that job. And I realized that I really like short client projects. I love implementation, training, and solving a different version of the same problem every few months. And that's pretty much what a consultant does. That is what professional services does. So that's where I went. And I didn't begin with the perfect title. My search bar could only return jobs I already knew how to name. The conversations taught me the language, and the experiment gave me proof. So instead of asking only what jobs can I apply for, ask which expensive problems have I already learned how to solve? And what does another industry call the person who solves them? Tell me in the comments, what problem do people repeatedly bring to you, even though solving it is not officially part of your title? And once you identify a path worth exploring, watch my spider drop video next. That's where I show you how to test it without immediately quitting your job.